My name is Dana. I'm 35, and last Christmas, my mother threw my 9-year-old daughter and me out of her house into the snow. Leave, and don't bother coming back, she said, right over the good china. My sister chimed in like she was passing the potatoes. Honestly, the holiday's better without you too. My whole family watched me stand up, my daughter's mitten still in my hand. I didn't shout. I said one calm sentence, opened my bag, and did something none of them saw coming. 5 minutes later, they were sprinting down the driveway after my taillights, no coats, begging me to take it back. What I tore apart on that porch step was the smallest thing they lost that night. Welcome to Quiet Reckonings, where the person nobody ever listened to finally gets the last word. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Let me take you back, before the porch, before the tearing, back when I still thought I could buy my way into belonging. At 4:30 on Christmas afternoon, I turned onto the county road toward my parents' house. My daughter, Maddie, sat in back guarding a showbox like it held gold ornaments she'd folded herself for weeks, and a hand-painted frame for her grandmother, her small fingerprints still pressed into the paint. In my bag were 2 sealed envelopes. I'd checked they were there 4 times before we left, the way you check a passport. The house looked exactly like it always did in December, a picture-perfect postcard, plastic poinsettias in the window boxes because real flowers die and dying looks bad. The good china was out, china nobody was ever actually allowed to use. My mother, Elaine, hugged Maddie at the door and gave me the nod she'd given me for 6 straight years, the nod you give a delivery driver. Our seats were where they always were, the folding table by the kitchen door, half in the draft. My sister, Renee, arrived 40 minutes late with her husband, Marcus, and nobody said a word about it. I'd arrived 2 minutes early, and Mom checked her watch like I'd tracked mud across her floor. I told myself this year would be different. I had a small speech prepared for dessert, 12 years of hoping, folded into 2 envelopes. I never got to give it. It fell apart over the roast, and it started with my daughter being proud of me. Maddie had been saving a story from school all day. Between bites, she let it out. We had to write about our hero for class. I picked Mom, because she works 2 jobs so we can help Grandma with her house. The room went silent in a way I felt on my skin. My mother's face didn't turn red, it went white, which on Elaine Whitfield is far more dangerous. Maddie had overheard more of my phone calls than I ever meant her to, and she just said the unspeakable thing out loud, in front of company, that the daughter this family kept hidden was the one holding it up. That's enough, my mother snapped. Renee laughed, thin and nervous. Kids and their imaginations. Maddie's face fell. She looked at me to see if she'd done something wrong, and that look is the one thing I still can't forgive them for. Then my mother stood, smoothed her blouse, and aimed her voice at me like a fire hose. Get out. And don't come back. Renee leaned back in her chair. Honestly, it's better without you 2 here. My father, Walter, stared at his plate like it needed guarding. I stood, dressed Maddie in her coat, pulled the 2 envelopes from my bag, and walked to the open front door. I turned so the whole table could see me. Then you won't mind me doing this, I said. Snow fell through the porch light behind me. I reached into the first envelope. But that porch moment had been 6 years in the making. I was 29 when my marriage ended. My ex-husband left for a co-worker when Maddie was 2, quietly, completely, taking the car and the last word. My mother met me in the kitchen that week with divorce papers in my bag. She didn't ask if I was okay. She dried her hands on a towel and said, "What will people think?" That was the whole conversation. After that, things shrank in ways you'd need a magnifying glass to prove. The family photo was taken while I was in the bathroom. My mother introduced me at gatherings with no title, no explanation, a fact she'd learned to work around, like a water stain on an otherwise perfect ceiling. Nobody screamed. Screaming would have been visible, and visibility was the only sin my mother recognized. I was simply nudged, seat by seat, toward the kitchen door. But one kind of call always came for me. It started 3 months after my divorce finalized, and it was always about money. First, my father's back, a herniated disc, and $1,800 bill I paid in 2 days as a new nurse with a toddler and a studio apartment. I felt needed. Hold on to that word. Then the property taxes. Half a new roof. Quiet advances for Renee's boutique, always routed through my mother, always in cash, always with the same instruction delivered like a kindness. Don't mention this to anyone, sweetheart. You know how your sister is. Over 6 years it added up to roughly $19,000, in pieces small enough that none of them looked like what they were. The money was welcome the way debt is welcome. I was tolerated the exact same way. I'd understood the pattern since I was 23, the year I tried to sit in the empty chair beside my mother and she put her hand on the back of it without turning her head. A seat at this table is earned, she said. I thought she meant chores. It took 12 more years to learn what the currency actually was, and that for people like me, the rate only ever climbs. I'm a hospice nurse. Reading decline is my job, and I saw the pattern clearly. I moved 40 minutes away on purpose. I limited visits. I told Renee no, twice, when she tried borrowing from me directly, which is exactly why the borrowing learned to root through my mother, wearing my father's name. I did everything a careful person does. Then I ran into 2 walls, no spreadsheet fixes. The first stood 3 feet 10 and was missing a front tooth. Maddie kept a paper garland on our fridge, 1 link for every day until we saw Grandma. My parents were the only other family she had, and a 9-year-old doesn't understand boundaries, she understands whether the porch light is on. The second wall was my father's heart. 2 years earlier they'd placed a stent in his chest, and ever since I could hear the strain in his breathing on the phone. He never asked for anything for himself. Instead he mailed me small boxes of screws, sorted by size, the one language that never got a machinist in trouble in his own house. So I kept going back. Then, the first week of December, my father called, and for once it wasn't about money, which scared me more than any bill ever had. He circled the conversation, then mentioned the bank being difficult. When I pressed, my mother's car crunched into the driveway on his end, and he said, "Gotta go, sweetheart," and hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and charted the symptoms like I would at work, the taxes I'd covered, a strange question in October about interest rates for a friend, my mother quietly cancelling her book club. Diagnosis: my parents were behind on the house, and nobody planned to tell me until it was terminal. I had $38,000 saved, 6 years of double shifts, a down payment fund for a small house with a yard, because Maddie wanted a dog and I wanted a door nobody could put us out of. That night I moved $31,000 into checking and wrote 2 checks, $22,000 for my parents, $9,000 for Renee's shop, so no one could call it favoritism. I sealed them in 2 envelopes and let myself imagine dessert, my mother's face softening, a hug somewhere people could see. I was 35, and my Christmas wish was a witnessed hug. I told my father the envelopes were coming, so he could sleep. That was my one mistake. Christmas Day, half an hour before dinner, I carried a tray back toward the kitchen and the door was cracked an inch. My mother's voice, low and organized, "She's bringing the checks. Let her hand them over at dessert. After that, everything goes back to normal. Don't make a scene, Renee." My sister laughed. "So we smile until dessert. Got it." I stood in the hallway holding $40 of vegetables, hearing my Christmas itemized. They already knew the money was coming. My father's relief had traveled from his mouth to her ledger within a day. The plan was simple: collect the gift, reshelve the giver. I could have walked out then. The honest reason I didn't was on the other side of the wall, in the den, where Maddie was showing her grandfather the garland, 1 link at a time, his face lit up like the whole holiday was finally worth it. One more Christmas for her. I could pay for one more. So I set down the tray, smiled, and decided to give them the checks anyway, not knowing my daughter was about to hand them something they wanted far less. The truth, out loud, in front of company. Watch what I couldn't see the first time through, my mother's eyes dropping to my bag on the chair, quick as a cashier checking a till. Renee leaning in over the potatoes, "So how's work?" "Still pulling weekend shifts." An audit disguised as interest. Marcus refilling his wine, studying the tablecloth like a man who suspects he's the only one without a script. Then the plates were cleared, my moment was coming, and Maddie got there first with the words, "Help Grandma with her house." My mother went white, not anger, terror, though it took me a long time to understand of what. She had one secret she guarded with her life, that the daughter she'd spent 6 years erasing was the one paying the bills. If Marcus heard it, the town's whole picture of Elaine Whitfield would tilt. So she removed the piece that didn't match the frame. She stood, smoothed her blouse, and fired, "Get out, and don't come back." The words were for me, the performance was for Marcus, and it was flawless. Renee joined in the only way she knows, finding the winning side early. "Honestly, it's happier without you two here." My father pushed his chair back 3 inches, hands coming up off the table. For one breath I thought he'd stand. Then my mother turned her head, just her head, and he sat back down. I took Maddie's hand. On the porch, my mother delivered one final line, quiet and private, "A seat at this table is earned." Snow drifted through the light. I heard myself say one quiet sentence, "Then you won't mind me doing this," and tore both envelopes in half, then in half again, and let the pieces fall into the snow like the world's most expensive confetti. I didn't yell. I buckled Maddie in like it was any Tuesday. Behind me, my father came off the porch with no coat and dropped to his knees in the snow, gathering pieces with his bare hands, 6 to 7 years old, a stent in his chest. Then my mother, without her coat, in front of a neighbor's window, something I had never once seen in 35 years, chasing my car crying, "You have to. You have to." Behind her in the doorway, my sister, white as the tablecloth, "Mom, what checks?" Because Renee, who'd just voted to throw me out, had never been told whose name sat at the top of the pipeline she'd been living on. I rolled my window down 5 inches. "Merry Christmas," I said, and drove home. "You have to" is a strange thing to say about a gift. Gifts don't come with obligations. Invoices do. It took one more knock at my door for me to learn exactly what she meant. The drive home took 40 minutes. Maddie made it to minute 12. Did I say something bad about Grandma's house? I watched her in the mirror, still guarding the showbox she never got to give. "You told the truth, baby," I said. "Truth isn't bad. It's just expensive." At home, I found 4 torn pieces of check I didn't remember picking up off the porch. Reflex. 11 years of nursing teaches you to keep what falls. I dropped them into an old glass jar of spare buttons on my shelf. This family. You'd be nothing without us. By Thursday, a flock of aunts, suddenly fluent in my character, selfish, dramatic. I answered nothing with more than one sentence, blocked no one, and let the phone buzz itself out in my locker. On New Year's Eve I did one piece of math I'd avoided, 41 messages that week, 0 asking how Maddie was doing. The 9-year-old marched out into the snow on Christmas. That math told me everything about what this family thought it had lost. 2 days after New Year's, my father knocked on my door holding his hat like a man at a funeral. He'd driven 40 minutes alone, something that had never happened in 6 years. He handed me a bank notice, arrears of $21,700, sheriff sale date printed like any other fact, February 12th, 10 a.m. The countdown had been ticking since before Thanksgiving, and nobody told me until the night I mentioned 2 checks were coming. My mother had already spent the $22,000 in her head and threw me out anyway. 6 years without a single consequence teaches a person that. "Your mother isn't cruel," my father said to his tea. "She's in debt. Everything about her is in debt, and she can't stop paying it back." I asked the only question that mattered, where did the original mortgage go? The answer was a shop called Willow and Pine. 3 years earlier, Renee's boutique was dying its first death, and my mother, rather than let this town watch a Whitfield daughter fail, quietly took out a new mortgage on a paid-off house and poured $60,000 into it. Nobody told Marcus. Nobody told me. For 2 years my parents serviced that loan out of a pension and whatever you sent when things got tight. Every emergency I'd covered for 6 years had flowed straight into the register of the sister who raised her glass on Christmas and said the holiday was better without me. I had been the silent partner in a store I couldn't afford to shop in. I spent 2 nights reconstructing 6 years of statements. The total ran $4,000 higher than I'd carried in my head, $23,000, not counting what I'd torn up on the porch. I taped the printout inside my kitchen cabinet, next to the jar, because I finally understood I never needed proof for them. I needed it for myself, for 2 in the morning. Meanwhile, Ashford Hollow had already chosen its story. The pastor's wife called, "A house is bigger than hurt feelings, isn't it?" The verdict was set. The daughter who got money proud and let her parents lose their home over a grudge. Nobody ever said the word home. Just house. Second week of January, after a brutal shift and a patient I'd lost, I came home to a voicemail of my mother crying. I sat with my checkbook open, pen uncapped, running the old program. Dad's heart won't survive an eviction. It's only money. You have it. The check was half-dated when Maddie padded in for water, took in the whole scene, and asked one question. Are you buying Grandma back? Then she went back to bed like she hadn't just cracked my chest open. I didn't finish the check. I didn't tear it up either, I left it undecided, and that weekend drove to the church attic to drop off donated blankets. There, an old family friend showed me a photograph, my mother at 29, standing before rows of folding chairs, holding a sheet of paper, shoulders braced like she was carrying a piano. 92, she said, the year Walter got laid off. Back then, if a family wanted help from the benevolence fund, the treasurer made them stand and read their circumstances out loud, for transparency. Your grandmother was the treasurer that year. Made her own daughter do it. I've known your mother 60 years, never once heard her ask for anything again. I stood there holding a photograph of the exact moment my mother was built. The rules that crushed her, she memorized. Then she taught them. It didn't excuse 1 hour of my childhood, but understanding a machine isn't the same as forgiving it. 4 days later, Renee stood in my apartment for the first time in her life, wearing full makeup, carrying her shop's last unsold handbag. She started with sarcasm and fell straight through it. The store's closed. Marcus found the loan papers. Mom's losing the house. I have nothing. Fix it. I looked at my sister, really looked, a woman promoted at birth and never told the job was unfunded. Fixing is my job, Renee, I said. I do it for strangers, for a paycheck, with gloves on. This family kept asking me to do it for free, barehanded, forever. She left without slamming the door. Quietly, like a guest. That's how I knew it was over. 2 days later my mother came with a folder, a quitclaim deed. She'd pay the arrears. In exchange, my name would go on the house, co-owner. Family, in writing, she said. Isn't that what you always wanted? She'd diagnosed me perfectly, she knew exactly what I'd been trying to buy for 12 years, and was now offering it in inventory clearance desperation. The horrifying part wasn't the offer. It was that it was accurate. I told her I'd think about it. Later I found she'd already signed her half, pre-signed, certain of me. I ran the real numbers with a friend whose husband works in loans, $23,000 to stop the sale, $7,000 of my own left, a signature loan to bridge the rest. I could do it. Saving that house was a real door standing open, and all it asked was 3 more years of weekend shifts and the rest of my life on retainer. So you can, my friend said. The question is what you'd actually be buying. That week I sat with a dying hospice patient, a woman who once refused to sell her late husband's house to move near her grandkids. I kept the house, she told me. I lost the boy. 11 Christmases of nothing but cards. Before I left, she gripped my wrist. When you tear something up, keep the pieces so you remember it was yours to tear. That Sunday I drove to the empty house alone while my mother was at church. It smelled exactly like it always had. In the kitchen doorframe, under decades of paint, the pencil marks where we'd been measured every birthday, Renee's dark and confident, mine faint, because it was always the stub pencil when it was my turn. Upstairs, my old bedroom was a starkroom, boxes stamped willow and pine stacked to the ceiling, my childhood room, holding my sister's debt. My father handed me a last box of screws on the back porch. Whatever you decide, kiddo, he said. The house was never the thing I minded losing. Monday morning I called my mother and kept it short. I'm not signing, and I'm not paying. 6 seconds of silence. Then, flat and formal, then you are no daughter of mine. You were the one thing I could still call mine that worked. An appliance review. I know, Mom, I said. That's why I'm hanging up. And I did, gently, no slam. The fallout took 72 hours to finish collapsing my old life. Texts accusing me of blood on my hands. The group chat's outrage. At the grocery store, the pastor's wife looked straight through me at the oranges. I corrected no one. Their story about me was never mine to edit, only mine to stop funding. The night before the auction, at 9:40 p.m., my mother knocked, no coat, no folder, no props at all, which for her was an earthquake. "May I come in?" I let her in. We sat at my kitchen table, the button jar between us. She pulled out, not a document, but the photograph from the attic, face down. She turned it over and pressed it flat. "You saw this. So you know I don't beg. I'm begging now." She told me the only truth I ever heard her say without an audience. She wasn't afraid of losing lumber. She was afraid of becoming that girl in front of the folding chairs again, in front of the whole town. Please. Every cell in me that had ever paid a bill for love stood up and reached for the checkbook. Then she said one word too many, "Help me stop the sale, and everything can go back to normal." Normal. I knew that word's whole country, the folding table, the checks passed in the dark, my daughter learning what her mother's love was priced at. I stood, and instead of the checkbook, I brought down the jar and set it beside her photograph. 2 exhibits. 2 women. The same machine, 35 years apart. "You didn't mind then," I said. "I don't mind now." Then, quietly, once, "You were right, a seat at this table is earned. I just finally stopped paying rent on mine. The house isn't your shame. What you did to the daughter who kept paying to be loved, that's the only thing here worth begging about." Then I laid a different paper on the table, not a check, a signed lease. A 2-bedroom apartment 3 blocks from the church, ground floor for my father's niece, 6 months paid in full, in their names. $5,400, out of the $7,000 I had left. "This is a gift," I said. "Not a purchase. I'm done buying what should have been free." She picked it up carefully, like it might tear. "No thank you, no apology." At the door, back to me, "The auction is at 10. "I know, Mom." A long pause. "Maddie's ornaments. She makes those herself." Then she left, and the door clicked shut, small, final, almost gentle. At 10:04 the next morning, the house sold at auction for $148,000. After the bank and fees, my parents walked away with about $85,000, not ruin, just not enough to keep up appearances. I wasn't there. I was holding my hospice patient's hand as she passed at noon, on the same day. The worst day of my life, and also the first one that was entirely mine. Renee posted online that I'd let our parents lose their home over a grudge. I never replied, never posted my spreadsheet, never told anyone about the apartment. Their story needed a villain, and I stopped applying for the role. Marcus filed for divorce in March. Renee moved into the spare room of an apartment she doesn't know I paid for. My father called every Sunday, talking screws and heart rates. My mother didn't call. Spring came anyway. The jar stayed on my shelf until an April morning, when Maddie brought it down herself. "Is this the money you ripped up at Grandma's?" "It is." "Why'd you keep it?" I gave her the truest version I know, so I remember the money was mine. And so were the hands. She decided it was too sad in a jar, and we spent the morning folding the torn pieces not back into checks, since they'd stopped being checks the moment I let them go into one paper ornament, blue and white and a little crooked. We hung it in the window, where it caught the 4 o'clock light. "Grandma would like this one," Maddie said. Kids aim without knowing they're aiming. That Christmas, my table sat 4 comfortably, with no folding end. My father showed up alone with a plate of burnt cookies he'd baked himself, admired every ornament like a blueprint, and measured Maddie against my kitchen doorframe with a marker he'd brought on purpose, her name, the date, pressed in dark and thick. No stub pencil this time. From the window I saw his truck idling, and in the passenger seat, my mother. She didn't come up. I didn't go down. But Maddie waved at her, big and unedited, the way kids wave at trains. My mother raised her hand a beat late, held it, then looked away. Not a storybook ending. Just a hand raised. The difference is, my daughter isn't learning those old rules. The lesson ends with me. Here's the final accounting, since this was always about ledgers. My parents are settled 3 blocks from the church, real flowers in the window boxes now. Renee is paying off her divorce lawyer in installments. My house fund is growing again, headed toward a yard and a dog. The jar is empty except for buttons. The ornament hangs in the window, proof that the free things are the only ones that ever appreciate. If your seat at the table came with a price tag, you were never family there. You were revenue. And the day you stop paying isn't the day you lose them, it's the day you find out who was ever really there. That's my story. 2 torn checks, 1 glass jar, and a paper ornament worth $31,000, and every cent of it earned. If someone's made you pay for a seat that should have been free, set the price to 0 today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.